CBS Sports HQ and NFL draft analyst Ryan Wilson's latest mock draft is out over on CBSSports.com. Ryan has Alabama's Bryce Young going first overall to the Texans, who, of course, have a needed quarterback. Then it's Chicago, number 2, for Young's teammate Will Anderson, and that's followed by C.J. Stroud from Ohio State at 3 to the Panthers. Olumu Fashanu and Jalen Carter rounding out his top 5. And we're reminding you about Ryan's latest mock because it is time for that front office perspective with our former general manager Scott Pioli and Rick Spielman. Gentlemen, Houston and the Bears become the first teams eliminated from playoff contention this season. When you're in that situation, even with games to play, Rick, does the front office focus shift completely to next year?
Yeah, no, I still think there's a season to be played. And there's still a lot of chance to develop your young guys that are playing for you more than likely at this point of the year. The personalities of coaches and personnel people and players, they're A-type personalities. They're competitive. They still want to win. But you also got an opportunity to see where your roster is over these last couple games. And the one thing I do not believe in, and we can touch on, is that this tanking theory and that it's best for you to go and tank so you can get the top pick in the draft. But you can have a high first-round pick, and there is no guarantee that that's going to be a generational or franchise-changing type player for your organization. For as many of the Joe Burrows, the Andrew Lucks, the Eli Mannings, there's the Jamarcus Russells, there's the Baker Mayfields, there's the Jameis Winstons. So there's a lot of busts as well as franchise-type players, and especially at the quarterback position where these two are going to be picking. Houston definitely is going to have to look at one of these guys. I think Chicago is definitely satisfied right now where Justin Fields is, and they will probably go look in another direction.
Rick, I agree with you. I think you bring up a couple of points there that I really like. First of all, the whole tanking thing is absolutely ridiculous to me. And it's one of these phantom things I believe that's brought up every once in a while just to sow the seeds of doubt. And if anyone has ever worked in those jobs or worked with a team, there are no general managers or coaches that would ever consider losing games to get a higher pick. It's just not a thing. The other thing that I like that you mentioned is that this is a really good time for evaluation, Rick. You're right. Sometimes when you're playing backup players, it's not because you're trying to lose games. It's because you're trying to develop players to make sure that they're better and they have live reps to be better players next year. And Rick, I know you and I have talked about this before. One of the most important things that's happening right now, not only with these two teams, but with every team, are the December draft meetings. All the road dogs, all the scouts have come off the road, and in one form or another, teams are having their December draft meetings right now, and the Bears and the Texans are sitting down, and because they know that they're out of the playoffs, they can start doing things strategically and planning-wise that other teams can't. For instance, not every assistant coach, not all coaches are used as part of the college scouting process. And some places do it where they are. The majority of places don't. And what you can start doing now is knowing which coaches you're going to send where. Where do you need extra help from a positional standpoint, from a positional cross-check evaluation standpoint? So this is a time where a general manager can, with certainty, know when the coaches are going to be ready for the scouts to get some assistance in the draft process.
And Scotty, just to clarify a quick point that I want to make too, and I think you're referring to this, you don't start talking to your coaches about the draft now. They're still out there game planning and coaching and trying to win games. You as a staff are starting to organize the game plan. So when the season is over, that's when you bring in the coaches.
Okay, but
exactly.
One of the things I wanted to follow up, though, is we were talking before we came on just a little bit about the situation with Tennessee and the firing of general manager John Robinson and how that timing is kind of questionable in a way. When do you start to evaluate staff?
Who's evaluating staff? Who's in charge?
Exactly right. Sometimes it's the owner, sometimes it's the general manager. And which staff are you talking about? Are you talking about the scouting staff, or are you talking about the coaching staff? Those are generally conversations that don't come up unless if you're talking about the coaching staff, they don't come up unless the owner brings it up or the general manager brings it up. But again, there's two different staffs that work together and collaborate together that get evaluated.
All right, let's move along. The Odell Beckham Jr. free agency tour continues. We heard from Dallas owner Jerry Jones on Tuesday that he was not confident in signing Odell without a workout. If you were in Jerry's spot, would you have him work out before agreeing to a deal, Scott?
I would. I think that Jerry is bringing up a great point. When you've got someone that's at his age, which is 30 and older, coming and is at a skilled position, coming off a traumatic injury, like an ACL, you need to know where they're at. You haven't seen them play at all. So wanting to see him physically, I think, is a reasonable ask. And what's interesting to me is we know when you bring a player like OBJ into your team, he's a strong personality. He's a big personality. Some players on your team are going to want him. Some players on your team may not want him on your team. And if the first sign that he's giving to you is that you're making a request that makes good business sense and makes good team sense, and he's resisting that, he may be sending you a message already. Not that he's not healthy, but he wants to be on his program and do things his way. And I think one of the interesting things is, I know I've been a part of teams when we were thinking about making certain moves with players with either big personalities or with some, again, he's never been in any never had any criminal issues, never had any problems, but there's always a little bit of noise with him. So you want to talk to your leadership team within your club to see who wants him, who doesn't want him, do they think he's going to fit? Because what you have to remember, the teams that are headed to the playoffs that are going to have an opportunity to have him, they are in the playoff run more than likely. Is he going to come in and help the chemistry or harm the chemistry? So I think these are internal conversations that you have to have. And again, I'd be a little apprehensive if a player was telling me that they weren't willing to let me see where they were at physically.
Yeah, and one quick point, Scotty, just to follow up with that. Most of the times, especially if a skilled guy at that age is coming off an ACL injury, part of the physical is not only getting with the doctors and the MRIs and everything else you want to do, but you do want to see him. You're not asking him to go do a vertical jump and run a 40-yard dash. What you want to see is actually him go out there and run routes and see if he's favoring that leg or not. And that could be a determination on how healthy you think he is before you do sign him to a contract.
Ravens quarterback.
Absolutely, Rick.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, absolutely. That's a great point, because there are things that you can test and that you can measure, but your eyes can determine. Rick brought up a great point. You can see if someone is favoring or has an issue, pushing off, exploding, changing direction. And again, you're not looking for times. You're not looking for any kind of metrics. You're looking to see how that person's moving. I'm sorry, Jim.
That's okay. No problem. Hey, it's your conversation. You guys guide it. I just give you the topics. So that's the Odell situation. Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson, we knew coming into the season he was betting on himself. It started well. It looked like the Ravens were going to have to pony up some big money in terms of keeping him, but it hasn't been great for a couple weeks. And then last week we get the knee injury. As a general manager, Rick, how do you approach this situation in terms of a new contract offer?
Yeah, I think Baltimore will hold its stance on what it was going in. I still think they will try to offer him a fair market value. I don't believe, and I think that's why the deal didn't get done, that he deserves a fully guaranteed Deshaun Watson contract. I think that's an exception to the rule or an outlier. But with his style of play, this is what makes him susceptible to injury, because he's a runner with the ball and he hasn't thrown great this year. And I understand they don't have a lot of tools around him, but Baltimore should hold their stance, and they need to get it done, but they need to get it done on the right terms and not go against their business principles. So I think they're in a great, and if Lamar does not want to do the deal, they still have an opportunity to franchise him the next 2 years. And that's great from an organizational standpoint, because you can just pay as you go. And barring that, there's going to be a holdout or something like that, which I'm sure would ensue if they do franchise him.
Rick, I think you're right. I think the big holdup has been and continues to be the guaranteed money. The fly in the ointment was the deal that the Cleveland Browns did for their quarterback, without a doubt. And I was there at the Ravens training camp this summer for a couple of days, and I really got the sense of talking to both Lamar and to Eric DeCosta that things were going to get done. They were in a really good place. Here's what I've loved about this entire thing, even though the deal didn't get done. both sides were continuously respectful to one another. They did not speak out of school. They did not plant information to try to leverage or out-leverage the other. So I think people are in a good place right now. The one, I have a couple of concerns like you, one being the injury. Obviously, this is the second year in a row where they've gone into December without Lamar Jackson, and that's a problem. That's when they start losing games. Last year, that's why they missed the playoffs. They've got to hope that that same outcome doesn't happen again this year. But the fact is, again, second December in a row where they are without Lamar. But the other thing that makes me think a little bit right now is Lamar Jackson is a wonderful, wonderful young man. Last week or 2 weeks ago, he was kind of tweaked by something that was done in social media, and he reacted and acted, in my opinion, very much out of character, which told me I wonder if the pressure is getting to him. So I think this is where the Baltimore Ravens may want to think about this. Eric DeCosta may want to think about paying attention to that message that was out there and make sure that he pays attention to his player, make sure that his player doesn't get into a dark place, and work to get this deal done. But you know, Rick, I think you bring up the biggest problem right now is a fully guaranteed deal, which I don't think any other club would be willing to do that.
No, and he's going to have to be willing to accept what they're going to be putting on the table. And every year, or I should even say every game that he doesn't, that's a huge risk that's to the player, not to the organization.
Well, it's
but the only no, and I was just going to say the only thing is this, because I've been in this situation myself personally. You can leverage as much as you want and you can stand where you are as a club. But the bottom line is if you lose a quarterback that's a good NFL quarterback, this is a game about supply and demand at the quarterback position. And if you don't have one, you don't have one. So if you lose one, that could be a big problem.
Love the one you're with.
Exactly. All right, since we're discussing the Ravens, that brings us to Job 4, presented by Jiffy Lube. And for the next few weeks at least, keeping the Ravens atop the AFC North is a job for Tyler Huntley. Huntley came on in relief of Jackson last week. He was 27 of 32 for 187 and an interception. And it's deja vu for him and the Ravens. He came in during Week 13 last year when Lamar got hurt and struggled to find consistency down the stretch. You guys alluded to what happened to the Ravens last year versus the Steelers in that final week. He needed a win to keep the Ravens in the playoff hunt, and instead he threw 2 interceptions and an overtime loss to Ben Roethlisberger and company. Steelers end up going into the playoffs. He finished 16 of 31 for just 141 yards. Half of those receptions were to Mark Andrews, who of course he'll be relying on again to again keep the Ravens in the playoff hunt. So here we are again with Huntley. Scott, can he get the job done this time?
This is going to be a heavy, heavy lift, as we just mentioned. You know, the Ravens are 1-5 since 2020 without Lamar Jackson. This is a problem. And you look at where the Steelers have been most recently. The Steelers are 3-1 the last 4 games since the bye week and since TJ Watt has returned. Their offense is improving under Kenny Pickett. This is going to be a very, very heavy lift for the Ravens with Tyler Huntley. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do it against this Pittsburgh Steelers team the way that they're ascending right now.
Well, and Tyler Huntley is a backup that fits this scheme. And what makes him valuable as a backup in this scheme is because he can make plays with his legs. I don't know if he's a pure thrower, but last year he averaged 6.3 yards per carry on 47 attempts. What's different this year is I don't know if their defense is as good, and I don't know if they have the skilled weapons around him to help overcome some of the shortcomings that they have shown so far this year. So I agree with Scott. It's going to be, if you want to call it a heavy lift, can he get the job done? It's going to be a lot more difficult than the situation he was in last year. So I agree with Scott. That lift is going to be maybe too heavy.
Tyler Huntley and Brett Hundley, the quarterbacks now for the Baltimore Ravens. Don't say that real fast. Former NFL general managers Rick Spielman, Scott Pioli giving us that front office perspective as we hit the home stretch of the 2022 NFL season. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, for more from Rick, be sure you're listening to him and Ryan Wilson on their brand new podcast, With the First Pick. It's a draft-centric podcast, but Rick and Ryan giving you draft prospect profiles and great analysis. These two guys watch all the tape. They have fantastic insight to get you ready for the draft. Download and follow With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast audio.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.